My name is Elayna Fernández, and I am a storyteller, a story strategist, and a student of pain.
Can you tell me about your own mental health journey?
Oh my, how long do we have?
We have all the time. Yeah.
You know, I remember being 5 years old and looking above my bed and looking at the tin ceiling. Um, I lived in a slum in the Dominican Republic, and at 5 years old, my nightly prayer was, God, please don't let me wake up tomorrow. So I think that that's the first thought where I knew that I struggled. And now I can look back at it as an adult and say I was depressed. I was struggling with suicidal ideation. I was struggling with anxiety at such a very small age, and I just have a lot of heaviness in my heart, and that reflected in my thoughts and it reflected in my writing. That's when I found poetry to express what I was going through. And actually, today's World Poetry Day. I don't know if you knew that, but but that has been a journey, a struggle for 4 decades, having these thoughts come to me and also knowing that not only do I struggle with this depression and anxiety, but also complex post traumatic stress. From all of the experiences that I've had, which we can, definitely talk about, but it
Yeah.
has been a very long journey.
Let's talk about those experiences.
Yeah, so extreme poverty is not fun. And we didn't really have what we needed to grow up, because in a slum environment, you really don't have access to the common things that we think of, just normal and then we take for granted in places like the United States. I go to my shower and warm water comes out. I didn't even know that was possible until I was 21 years old and living, in another area. But we didn't have running water. We fetched water every day. We didn't really have the food and clothing and medical assistance that we needed. And many of us didn't even go to school. I was very fortunate to be able to receive an education, and that my parents had the foresight and really believed in reading and writing and getting an education. So since that age, since I have, I started to reason, I knew that we were different. I knew that we lived in an area of town that no one wanted to go to. I knew how we were judged and labeled. So that was very, the beginning of a very long journey of bullying, of name calling, and all of the things that make you feel ostracized, excluded, and discriminated against. And at home, it wasn't safe. So that is another layer that you think of when, maybe the world is cruel, maybe you know, people don't know what you're going through, but when, the hurt and the most intense hurt happens in the four walls of your home, and, someone who is supposed to protect you is actually hurting you and verbally and physically, then you start to question, and I certainly started to question, what's the point? And is this ever going to change? And I was a resilient cookie.
Yeah.
And so I coped with poetry, I coped with writing, I coped with, really many tools, and I didn't even know how I was accessing that. I believe that it was divine inspiration that allowed me to seek these ways to uh, process my feelings. And I was able to feel very motivated and inspired to maybe just leave the home and get access to a different way of living. So I was very motivated to go to school, to really graduate at an early age. And at 7 years old, I had an experience in the landfill that was right behind where we lived. And it was my favorite place, by the way, because people threw out things that were just so fun to me and so interesting. And Michael, when I was 7, I found this magazine and it was in English. And so I told my brother, I was 7 years old, and I told my brother, if we learn this language, we're going to have this life. And the vivid pictures, it was kids playing with soccer balls and books, which was my dream to own my own books, and happy families, and wearing jeans and wearing tennis shoes, and just like the dream life. And so I started saving, and I started my first storytelling business. That's why I call myself a storyteller, because I've always been a storyteller. And my first storytelling business, doing a cardboard puppet theater, and using, the lack of electricity to my favor, because everybody, is kind of bored and doesn't have anything to do when there's no power. And so I would use candles and cardboard and tell these stories and charge, little coins and kind of save up until I had enough to enroll myself in English classes. Um, I was 11 at that time. And so that learning English, being a, all A student, all of that allowed me to graduate early, to move to the capital, and to go to college. So that was really fun. And I was starting to be independent and to feel like all of that was behind me, and that I had a new life, and that my magazine dreams were coming true. And then that's when the hard things happened. So if you think that was hard, at 19 years old, I was still in school, I was still in college. I graduated at 15. And so at 19, I was still in college. I was attending college in the Dominican Republic's capital, Santo Domingo. And I took public transportation. I lived on my own. And so one day I boarded a public car. It's like a combination of a ride share with a bus. So the public cars have a route and they take you to your destination. I was on my way to a class, and all of a sudden I handed him the fare, and I'm just so happy that I have money for public transportation, because usually I would walk miles and miles. And that smile was wiped from my face the moment he said, "That's not how you're going to pay." And so this driver takes me to a remote location, parks the car, and proceeds to torture me in every imaginable way. It was like something I had never imagined that people would be possible of doing to anybody, but to a young girl, who I didn't really even know anything about, you know, sex or sexual assault. I was just really naive and innocent, and just thinking that this was just horrific, and the name calling again and the beating up again. So all of that, I felt like I'm never going to escape this violence. And I was just feeling really hopeless. And so this went on, and I was able to escape. Obviously I'm here. But he threatened me, threatened to kill me. And he was about to take me somewhere else to kill me, because I wasn't being good enough or cooperative enough for his taste. And all of a sudden, Michael, the car didn't start. And I just hear the engine. And I just hear the engine and the clicking sound. And I didn't really know cars, but I did know that I had tried to get out before and I couldn't. And so when he started kind of looking under the hood and getting out of the car and being nervous about this thing, and he put down his baseball bat and was kind of focused on getting the car to start. And then I noticed the locks go up. And something inside of me said, Elayna, get out. And of course, by this point, I didn't even think I could get up. I was just so weak, so beaten up, so, also beaten down. But it was like a supernatural strength. And I started to walk down a path that led to a gas station where I was able to get back to normal, well, not really, but be back to safety. The paramedics and the police came, and then basically I was able to start the recovery process. So if that's not enough, 6 months later, this was 1996, March 7th, I was kidnapped. October 28th, I'm back in school trying to restart my life. And then I have another experience in another car where the car flips. I'm a passenger, flips 3 times, falls on top of me. I get taken to the ER, declared dead on the spot, dead on arrival. After a few minutes, then they, apply CPR, electrocardioversion, and I come back and I'm in a coma for 8 days. So that is the start. Like, I'm not even 20 years old, and 19 broken bones, brain injuries, all of these things happen. And there's way more, but that's like the first half of my life, how it was just, all of these difficulties and all of this violence. And that's kind of the first half, and how my mental health was really affected, because the more I experienced this external, I would say, circumstances, the more I doubted that I was ever going to be able to cope or escape all of this situation. So I'll let you, kind of process that. But and I say that with a smile because I'm still here, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can all cope with the hard situations in our lives, and we can definitely access tools for healing and for recovery. But I'm not smiling because it happened. I'm smiling because I was strong enough and was blessed to have the ability to recover.
What is it like telling your story publicly?
It is unnerving. So, I feel, really safe with you, of course. You're and to think about strangers listening,
Yeah.
right? It is definitely not easy. However, what's easy is to know that it can help someone. And so, because I'm a storyteller and I started, telling stories when I was a very young age, I I started writing only for myself, and I wouldn't share these things. And as a matter of fact, just, the kidnapping, it took me 20 years to actually write it down. To actually publish it, it took 8 months from the time I actually wrote the whole piece and was able to articulate it. So it's definitely not something that I think needs to happen right away. And something that I want to add to that is that sometimes you will hear words like, oh, we have a responsibility to tell our story because it will help somebody else. But I think our first responsibility is to ourselves and our healing. So one thing is to write in your diary and to process for yourself and to be raw, or to tell it to someone safe in your life if you are lucky and blessed enough to have a safe or a few safe people. But it isn't until you're ready and you're, I wouldn't say healed because there's no such thing,
Right.
but in a place where you can not be re-traumatized and re-triggered by the story, and it still hurts, but you're focused on the gift that you're giving to others. So I call that the gifts of pain. When you have processed it enough, like alchemy, and you have transformed it into a gift for someone else. So it definitely, it's never easy, and it gets easier, but it can be a gift for others after you have done the work for yourself.
You've written books and you've done poetry. What is it like getting all your thoughts, feelings, ideas out on the page?
Oh my. you know, getting it on the page for myself, it's so healing. So when we write, especially when we write poetry, because there are no rules for poetry, so we don't have to judge it, right? Um, we are very judgmental with the things that we create sometimes. And so, but poetry doesn't have a lot of rules unless you are, going for the Pulitzer Prize or something like that.
Right.
but it just feels so liberating to give the parts of yourself that we judge or that we don't accept and give them a voice. So in my poetry, I'm able to say things that I wouldn't normally say out loud to other people in that moment because I'm processing what I'm thinking. And sometimes it's dark. I mean, yes, I write happy poetry too, but the thing is that when we allow ourselves to just say what we're feeling without filter and put it in writing, because also, there's a circuitry that's accessed when you write. That's not the same as when you're typing or when you're even speaking. So we can access different sides of our, brain hemispheres. And so I think that it's so, so necessary to write our story. Now, publishing it, it's another thing, because that doesn't feel ever like we're ready and like it's perfect. We want it to be perfect. That's a natural feeling, but it's also an unrealistic feeling, because if we were waiting to for perfection, then, or to appease to everyone, it will never happen. We will never publish anything. So for me, it's mostly an act of love. So an act of love for other people. So when I publish my books and my poetry, I don't do it for myself, because if what I want to do for myself is hide it. But what I want to do for others is, here, if I can write this and find acceptance, then you can too. And I know that the reason why we experience, I call it the 3D, so much disease, dysfunction, and disconnection, is because we are suppressing our feelings. We are, believing the stigmas and the shame that are out there in society, that we're supposed to feel whole all the time and to be positive, and I always have this quote, which is kind of, I would say, contradictory, or a paradox, or if you will, or just surprising for people, because I'm known online as the positive mom.
Yeah.
But positivity doesn't come from suppression or bypassing. So positivity comes from processing. And so whenever we are in pain, we don't, we're not called to be positive. We're called to be present with our emotion. So if we're present with our emotions, I'm present with your emotions, Michael. If you're going through something, then we can get to a place of positive, because we are then in community. And actually, I'm sure from the research that people who experience a traumatic event or a difficult event turns into a traumatic event because they feel alone in that
Yeah.
event,
Mhm.
versus people who are cared for, witnessed, supported, seen, and comforted. They might experience post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress. And so it is what's traumatic is not the hurt, but feeling alone in our hurt. And so that is exactly, what we do to people when we are doing what I call it motivational shame. And this happened to me after being kidnapped. Michael, people would tell me like, "Oh my gosh, we're so happy that he was caught." And it's like I want you to feel sad for I want what I went through. I don't want to hear
Yeah.
this gratitude. This gratitude to me, I see it now from a different perspective, but I was forced to go to court and confront him when I wasn't ready. I was, victim blamed. People were being grateful for things like I was negative for STDs and for pregnancy. And it's like, this is not a celebration. This is a tragedy for me. This is not where I want to be, thinking that I am pregnant. I might be pregnant. Like, I didn't even consider that, and you're celebrating it. And so we do things like that. Like, I remember one time I was experiencing a very, strong ideation, and I called a friend and I said, I'm feeling this way. And this was as an adult, and I was saying, I've struggled with suicide thoughts for a long time, and I feel that I'm not okay right now. And she said to me, and this is very hard for me because I cannot believe she said this. She said, "You have such beautiful daughters. Why don't you think about them?" And she made me feel so selfish about something that I couldn't help,
Yeah.
and also that I was asking help for. And in my mind, actually, I was contemplating these thoughts because I felt that it was the best for my daughters. And people don't understand, which I get that, but we all have a responsibility to start understanding what it's like to experience suicidal thoughts, whether passive or active, what it's like to be depressed, so that we don't drive people further into depression and into the spiral that they might be already experiencing, rather than saying, "Oh my gosh, this is sad," or any kind of validation. And the research shows that validation actually helps us access, that helps calm the amygdala and access the prefrontal functions. So if we have executive function, we start to think more rationally. But these are things that we can't, we don't desire. It's like, "Oh, let me act, in this way, or think this thought." It's something that we need to be more informed about, and understand the language that helps and that validates someone in pain, and also apply that to ourselves when we're feeling in that way.
When I was doing my research, I saw that you uh, have done several TEDx talks.
Yeah.
You spoke at the UN before. What is it like speaking at, these large platforms?
Wow. Well, it's an honor for me to be able to have an impact. And years ago when I started speaking, it was about, over 15 years ago. I wanted to be behind the scenes. I wanted to type on my laptop, right? And and that was comfortable at that time. And so I started stretching myself, and of course, with the help of mentors that helped me along the way, stretch myself and started kind of sharing, and being in a place where I share in person. I also do a lot of virtual events, but in person, when you're able to look at people's faces and see things click, and see how they feel seen and safe and supported, and they come up to you and share their own stories with you, it feels like such a beautiful and sacred honor. And so for me, no matter where I'm speaking, I speak at a lot of organizations. I feel the same way with TEDx. I love the community of TEDx, and the idea, or the concept that ideas can change everything. And so not only I'm a TEDx speaker, but I'm also a TEDx organizer and coach. And that my first TEDx, it was so amazing. I could not believe it. And I've done 5 of them, but I could not be.
So,
Thank you. But I could not believe that I was on such a stage, and it definitely gave validation to all of the work that I've been doing over the years. For the UN, I was able to receive the Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award at the UN and speak about suicide prevention. And so for me, really it was full circle, to think about my 5-year-old self and struggling in such a way, and, being over 40 now, and being at the UN advocating for other people in the world globally, in all of these countries who might be struggling in the same way. And so I just felt really proud about that 5-year-old girl who wrote in the blank spaces of her Bible, so that she could stay alive. So making a difference to other people, especially in remote places where all over the world, it's a joy and a privilege for me, and I don't take that lightly. And I am really grateful, and I it's just a blessing. Yeah.
how important is faith when you're helping your mental health?
Oh my goodness. Well, to me, it's everything. I think, one of the reasons that I've been able to cope with, all of the thoughts, and also not only the thoughts that come, but also the events that happen, are because I feel that I get that support from my faith. And I'll give you an example. When I was 28 years old, my daughters were 1 and 2. I had only 2 at that time. I have 4 now. And so but I had my first couple girls, 4 daughters, can you imagine? And
Wow.
and
I have 2 daughters, so
yes. So they are 22 and 21 now, but they were 1 and 2 at that time. And um I was experiencing homelessness with them, and I became a single mom, and I just felt really discouraged. And having my little girls, I didn't know what I was going to do. I wanted to go back home, but I couldn't because I wasn't a citizen of the United States, but they were. And I laid on the ground in the fetal position, and I just said, God, like, am I useless? Am I going to be able to do this? Like, what? I just thought, this is over. I don't know what to do. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't know how to drive. Now you know my struggle with cars, where it started. But I felt that God spoke to me in that moment and showed me the magazine again. Oof. And told me, you know, this vision wasn't for you. It was for your little girls. That's why the magazine was in English. And so I understood that all my life I was being protected and directed to learn this language so that I could give my little girls a good life here in the United States. And so that's when I understood also, when I was in my coma, it all made sense because I had also encounters that I was remembering at that time, and how it wasn't a glitch in the car, it was a miracle. That's why it didn't start. And so all of these things are really a solidification of my faith, and prayer is something that I do daily. I always write my thoughts. Sometimes I write to God in my journal, and having a conversation in that way. And so keeping that faith that I am not alone, and that I have that supernatural protection that allowed me to get out of the car, that allowed me to heal from cancer, that allowed me to start a new life, that allowed me to see a way where there wasn't a way. So I'm always seeing, for me, the hand of God in everything and in every day. And I have taught this to my daughters, as they also struggle with anything in their life, to seek that protection. And I think faith is not only for ourselves and to feel like we're not alone, but also to know that we can be the hands of God, or the voice, or you know the whatever, right? Like we can act on behalf of God to other people, to be a witness, to be to minister to them, to comfort them, to feed them, not only physical feeding, but also spiritual and emotional feeding. And so I think that faith is definitely one of the biggest factors. And another one would be gratitude, which, is also a biblical principle anyway.
You talked earlier about being the positive mom online. What
Yeah.
are some of the things you've learned from your kids?
Oh my. Everything. Kids are so perceptive. And I think the number one thing that I've learned to by being the mother of my children is to be a better listener. And that's because every child and every person has their own path to walk on this earth. And so I have learned from them to allow them to be who they are, and to kind of stay out of the way, to not impose my fears and my agendas and you know my my past on them.
Yeah.
They're brand new, and they came for another purpose that is not my own. And so while I can guide them and teach them values and teach them, principles and ethics, and how to really navigate life, they're going to be their own person. And so I think that control is an illusion. That's number one. Number two, validate people when they're in pain. Sometimes we get a 2-year-old saying, "Mom, it hurts," or, and we're like, "You're okay," or "Don't cry." And I've learned not to do that, to understand that every problem is a valid problem. There's something out there that they call first world problems, and they use that to invalidate people because we compare suffering. We say like, "Oh, Michael, that's nothing compared to what you went through," or "That's nothing compared to what I went through." And it's like, no, a child lost, their toy. That's a tragedy for that child. A
Yeah.
person, scratched their Corvette. That's a tragedy for that person. So we need to just focus on being understanding and validating to people, and not to judge whether the problem or the grievance is worth our compassion or not. It's always worth our compassion. And I think, I could list 20 things, but I'm going to say one last thing that I learned from my children, and it's to be curious and to learn from everything and everyone. I think that sometimes we think that we know it all, and it's just really, I think that my children put me in my place, like the first one I got. That with my first one, I learned that I didn't have all the answers. And
Yeah.
yeah, I was 24, and I thought I had all the answers. And I have learned over time to be a student, and to really just learn from every person that crosses my path, because we focus so much like on titles and age and all of these things that really, they're great. I have my titles too, but that doesn't mean that I'm more or less or know more or less than other people. We just know different things. And so if we are humble enough to just listen and learn, listen and understand, we're going to develop wisdom, not knowledge. Knowledge is cheap, but wisdom is priceless. And so wisdom is so important. We're lacking that in the age of information. We're lacking wisdom, and that's why.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
Ooh, okay. I love this. So, so there have been, different stages. I believe that, talk therapy has its place, and I've practiced it, at certain times. I also, like I said, I look for ways to stay connected to my spiritual source. So when I'm connected to God, I fare better with my mental health. Also, time alone, which is very hard to do when you have little ones, or when you have, to work a lot. I remember when my oldest were 1 and 2, and I started working, thankfully, and I got up from that fetal position, and got to work in the Positive Mom blog, which has been 20 years of that. Um, I remember that I didn't have like any time at all. I had a 40-plus hour job, and I was trying to grow this business that God gave me to work on. And but sometimes just 5 minutes in which you even visualize. I used to take these 5-minute vacations and just close my eyes and imagine that I was at the beach in the Dominican Republic. There's this beach called Samana where I do my retreats. And I remember, just thinking, I'm there and it feels so good, and just a little renewal. But I also have this practice that's evidence based that I will share real briefly, that's called Date Your Pain. So every morning, I do it in the morning, but you could do it anytime. It takes 2 minutes, because neuroanatomy showed us that it takes 90 seconds for any emotion to be processed in our body. So we take 2 minutes, 90 seconds of processing, and 30 of validation. So it's like this. I call it the 3 S's: see, sense, and say. So first you get grounded and kind of see or recall the memory or moment, or the event that you want to process. And you don't have to have an agenda, because it will show up. You just kind of have that command, and something will come that irritated you or stressed you or hurt you, and you just kind of see it as a third person in your mind. Then you sense, which is scanning your body to see where you can feel that emotion that is caused by that thought. So if the thought is, Michael hurt my feelings, you didn't, but I'm just making up.
Right.
And I'm just imagining Michael saying that thing that hurt my feelings. I look for my body, where is that hurt? And so that I can feel it and process it and identify it. And so then I will say, see, sense, and say, then I will say something validating to myself in the third person using my name. Like Elayna, like he said, was not true. Elayna, you are more than that. Elayna, if I reacted grumpy to you and I feel guilty, I would say, Elayna, that was the natural reaction to what Michael said. So it's not like you're going to be okay and this too shall pass, or Michael is a jerk.
Yes.
So it's
All
nothing
those.
like that,
Yeah.
right? Because those are the things that are motivational. So it's not motivational shame, it's validation. where you are being a witness to your emotions. And if you do that every day, then you're going to experience more peace. You're going to start your day or end your day on a different note. Is you're going to have this review that this emotion just got out. You're not storing it in your body anymore. You're letting it out. And so I do that every morning, and it helps me stay grounded. And I call it being an instrument of peace at work, at home, and in your world. You're going to feel that peace that comes from that. And it's going to keep you, it's like a maintenance type of thing that allows you to quickly ground yourself in peace.
Where do you want to see your mission in the next few years?
Ooh, let's see. I think I want to definitely lead more writing retreats for people who want to write their memoirs. And the reason I want to do that is because I think that if we think about, oh my, it gives me a little bit of a contraction in my stomach just thinking about that. When libraries were burnt and we lost so much information, right? But nowadays we value books and they are so accessible. So thankfully we are not going to be burning books anytime soon, hopefully. But when you write your story in a book, it transcends time. It transcends time. It outlives you. And for me, I always have this mantra uh, that I'm going to be the most amazing great grandma that ever lived. And that kind of keeps me, motivated to stay alive. But I want to leave a mission for my posterity so that all of the things, not only am I writing for my posterity to know who I am and to know, if my great great grandchild struggles with thoughts of suicide at 5 years old, they know my grandma lived through that. And my great grandma overcame it and coped with it. So, but I want the whole world to learn from what I learned, to access the wisdom that I've distilled from my studies, from the people in my life, and from all of that. But I also want to help others do that too. And so I think that writing books, it's something that is the most fascinating thing for me because, social media is fleeting. We don't know when the next social media is going to shut down. We all thought that my space would live forever.
Yes, we did.
And Vine, I've been on all the social media platforms. And while I enjoy these tools, I think that we need to really focus on documenting our wisdom for the next generations. And I can tell you that my grandpa, I had a grandpa who passed away before I got to know him, but, my grandparents were such a source of tradition and groundedness and purity, and I learned so much from them and the stories that they told. So I think that if we're able to preserve our family history, is so powerful. So I want my mission to, continue to help people all over the world to really find their purpose and their faith and their identity in their writing so that we can not only cope with what we've been through but also help others do the same. And I call that a heart-centered leader because it's really, coming from the heart. Because like I said, it's not easy to share. They call it air your dirty laundry, right? That's
Yeah.
what they call it. Yeah. But if you don't air it, it's gonna rot.
How can people reach out to you and learn more?
Thank you for asking that question. So I have my website, thepositivemom.com. If you put a /EF like Elayna Fernández, then you can get all my social media platforms on there. But it's also easy to follow me at The Positive Mom. And I also have my community, which is the transformationalstorytellers.com. Transformationalstorytellers.com is where I teach heart-centered leaders to become transformational storytellers so that they can, share books and talks and digital stories that can transform people's lives.